Did you ever hear about the woman who thought she could outsmart a sheriff by stealing his cattle's water in the middle of a Texas drought? Yeah, that's how this story starts, and let me tell you, it only gets wilder from there. Sheriff Luke Tanner stood over his dead heifer Daisy, her bloated body baking in the sagebrush sun, tongue flopping out like she choked on the world's cruelest prank. The cracked mud around his livestock tanks told him everything he needed to know. Someone had drained every last drop. Taped to a fence post, flapping like a taunt, was a neon green flyer from the Pine Hollow HOA. Saw water violation, corrected. Saw Luke's jaw tightened. He didn't need to read the fine print to know who was behind it. And whoever it was, they had no idea they just picked a fight with the wrong man. Luke didn't yell or curse. He just breathed slow, eyes tracing the empty tanks, the thirsty cattle lowing like they were begging for a miracle. He snapped a photo of the flyer, sent it to his deputy with a curt, "Trouble's brewing," and crumpled the paper into his pocket like it was Evy Denke from a murder scene. In his book, it was. Margaret Voss, the queen bee of Pine Hollow, was the kind of person who'd alphabetize her spice rack and then fine you for sneezing too loud. 3 years ago, she'd rolled into sagebrush with her pressed blouses and a mission to see Ivy Lisa the town's dusty chaos. Pine Hollow, her cul-de-sac of cookie-cutter houses, was nicknamed the Fortress, by locals half in jest, half in dread. Margaret didn't just run the HOA, she saw the HOA, dishing out rules like a dictator in flip-flops. No loud trucks, no wildflowers, no clotheslines defiling her suburban utopia. Luke had seen her handiwork before. Old Man Jenkins got slapped with a fine for unruly tomato plants. The Methodist Church had to ditch their welcome sign because it was too colorful. But draining a ranch's water in a heatwave? That wasn't just petty. That was war. The kicker? Luke's ranch wasn't even under Pine Hollow's jurisdiction. It sat a mile outside their boundary. Yet Margaret, with her boundless nerve, had started claiming territory like she was redrawing the county map. First came the flyers, then the fines, and now, apparently, she had minions doing her dirty work. Luke decided it was time for a VY sit. Margaret's office was her garage, decked out like a bureaucrat's fever dream, filing cabinets, a folding table with a bell, and a sign proclaiming "Saw Director on Duty Saw." It reeked of lavender air freshener and spite. Luke didn't knock. He stepped in, tipped his hat, and watched Margaret look up from her binder, startled but trying to hide it. "Sheriff," she said, stretching the word like a dare. "What's this about?" "You drained my tanks," Luke said, voice flat as the desert. Margaret's lips curled into a smug little smile. "Your tanks were non-compliant with Article 9C of our covenant. Stagnant water breeds disease. We acted preventatively." "You mean you sabotaged my ranch?" "I mean we ensured Saw Harmony Saw," she said, folding her hands. "It's my duty." "This ain't your sandbox, Margaret. My land's not in your HOA." "Not yet," she said, cool as a snake. She flipped to a laminated page and tapped it. "Our new extended influence clause covers a 2-mile radius around Pine Hollow. Filed with the county, all proper." Luke leaned in, voice low. "Lady, that clause ain't worth the paper it's on. You can't rule folks who never signed up for your game. This is Texas, not your personal fiefdom. People have guns, cattle, and now a dead heifer because you played water cop." Margaret's eyebrow arched. "If you're accusing me of personally draining your tanks, Sheriff, you're mistaken. It was a community effort." "I'll remember that when the lawsuits hit," Luke said, turning to leave. "Better lawyer up." Outside, the sun baked the pavement into a shimmer. Luke called his deputy, Clara, and told her to dig into every Pine Hollow HOA record from the past year. "Find out if they've got a leg to stand on," he said. "If not, I want names." Next, he swung by Rusty's Tavern, where locals nursed beers and grudges under a sagging roof. Word of Daisy's death and the drained tanks had spread like wildfire. Miss Evelyn, who sold pies at the farmer's market, whispered, "They fined me do law $150 for gaudy wind chimes." Farmer Roy, sipping a bud, grumbled. Margaret said my mailbox was an inch too tall. This wasn't just annoying anymore. It was a slow-motion takeover, and Sagebrush was letting it happen because nobody had fought back. Until now. That night, Luke patrolled his ranch with a flashlight, checking gates and tanks. That's when he spotted Ida glint in the grass, a small drone, its red light blinking like a guilty eye. He picked it up, mud smearing the rotors, the camera still intact. Someone had been watching him. This wasn't just HOA nonsense anymore. This was surveillance, maybe even criminal trespass. Luke's mind shifted from irritation to strategy. He wasn't just going to stop Margaret. He was going to unravel her whole operation. By morning, Luke sat at his kitchen table, coffee cold, the drone in pieces. He'd cracked it open like a puzzle, finding a memory card and a serial number etched into the frame. This wasn't a kid's toy, it had thermal imaging and a zoom lens, the kind used by hunters or creeps. He slid the card into his laptop and watched the footage, flyovers of his barns, his tanks, even his porch. One clip, timestamped 3 days ago, showed a blurry figure in a ball cap, Ronnie, Margaret's lapdog. Security chief. Slinking along his fence with a hose and bolt cutters. Luke's blood simmered. He grabbed his keys and headed to the county records office. The place smelled of stale coffee and dusty paper. Clara was already there, flipping through folders with a smirk. Margaret's been busy, she said. Registered Pine Hollow as a nonprofit but runs it like a cartel. Fines, dues, improvement fees all unapproved by the county. And get this, she filed new maps claiming 3 extra square miles, but they're not stamped. She faked it. Luke skimmed the files, his jaw tight. So, she's a fraud. And nobody noticed because nobody cared. Till now, Clara said. They drove back through town, passing fields and weathered barns that felt more like occupied land than open country. Stories were piling up. A widow fined for Christmas lights. A vet's flag yanked off his porch. A couple threatened over their bird bath. Every tale ended with a green flyer and Margaret's loopy signature. Luke stopped by the vet's place first. Gus, a grizzled old man, clutched his flag, voice shaking. They came at night, Luke. I put it back up, and they taped a DO Law 200 fine to my door for unapproved symbolism. That woman's unhinged. Luke promised to handle it, but Gus wasn't alone. Every stop brought another story, another flyer, another slice of Margaret's petty reign. Then came the call that flipped everything. A barn fire out at the Carter place. Luke raced over, sirens blaring, and found smoke curling from a charred heap of beams. The Carters were shaken but safe, firefighters dousing the last flames. Luke knelt by the wreckage and spotted a twisted metal sign. Saw Pine Hollow HOA, community partner Saul. Mrs. Carter, face streaked with soot, whispered, "Last week, Margaret said our barn's paint was non-compliant. Threatened to have it torn down. I thought she was bluffing." Luke snapped photos, his gut twisting. If this was tied to the HOA, it wasn't about rules anymore. It was about fear. Back at the station, Luke and Clara pored over the EVY Denke, drone footage, fake maps, now a possible arson. "If this were anyone else, we'd be filing charges," Clara said. "Problem is, folks are scared. Margaret's got them thinking she's untouchable." Luke shook his head. Not anymore. He rewatched the drone video, pausing on Ronnie's smug face. The guy strutted like a wannabe cop, always trailing Margaret. Luke decided it was time for a chat. Next morning, he found Ronnie outside Pine Hollow, finding a kid for a tacky skateboard. Luke pulled up, stepped out slow. "Ronnie," he said, voice like gravel. "We need to talk about you sneaking onto my land with bolt cutters." Ronnie puffed up. "Margaret authorized it. Legal under Section 5D, Water Code." Luke stepped closer. "That code don't apply to my ranch. You trespassed. That's a crime." Ronnie's bravado cracked. "I was just following orders." Luke opened his cruiser door. "Now you're following me to the station." Ronnie sputtered but went along. It wasn't just about locking him up, it was about showing Margaret her empire was crumbling. That night, Luke called the county attorney to freeze the HOA's authority and audit their books. Sagebrush was waking up, and Margaret had poked the wrong bear. He nailed a sign to his gate, saw private property, no trespassing, HOA free zone. Saw it was half a joke, half a warning. Sleep didn't come easy. Rage burned low in his gut, keeping him on his porch till dawn, replaying the drone, the fire, Margaret's smug smile. He wasn't just going to stop her. He was going to bury her operation. Luke needed answers, so he cited Miss Lorraine, a retired bank auditor who'd once caught a conman with nothing but a calculator and grit. Her house smelled of cinnamon and secrets, stuffed with ledgers she'd collected since Margaret fined her du la 254, overly festive, porch pumpkins. Lorraine showed Luke the HOA's subcommittee's beautification, zoning, compliance, each with its own fees. Fines stacked on fines, all funneled to a private account tied to Margaret and her crony, Vance, a guy who wore cargo shorts to funerals and sold Sir V.Y. Val kits from his van. "This ain't governance," Luke said, rubbing his temples. "It's a shakedown." At the courthouse, Luke filed for an audit and an injunction. The clerk, who'd gotten a flyer for her unsightly curtains, was happy to help. But Margaret wasn't idle. An envelope arrived at the station, sealed with a silver sticker. Inside, a cease and desist letter accused Luke of abusing power and stealing the drone. He laughed, a rare sharp sound. It was desperate, toothless, and proof she was rattled. That week, Luke called a town hall. Folks packed the community center, ranchers, moms, vets, all buzzing with nervous energy. Luke didn't talk like a sheriff, he talked like a neighbor. He laid out the drone, the fake maps, the ledger of fines. He held up Margaret's flyer about his non-compliant tanks, and the crowd's bitter laughter filled the room. "She's not the law," he said. "She never was. We stop her now." Right on cue, the doors burst open. Margaret stormed in, gray suit crisp, flanked by Ronnie, out on bail, Vance with a clipboard, and Shelley, the HOA's gossip-obsessed treasurer, and oversized earrings. "This is an unsanctioned rebellion," Margaret barked, while VYing her binders. Luke didn't flinch. "You're not a government, Margaret. You're a club with too many rules." She jabbed a finger. "You'll pay for this." He shrugged. "I already paid with a dead cow." The crowd roared laughter, claps, a wave of defiance. Margaret flushed, then slapped a green citation on the podium, accusing Luke of slander. He picked it up, voice steady. "You're under investigation for fraud, spying, and theft. This flyer's EVY Denke. Get a lawyer." Margaret stormed out, her crew trailing like scolded dogs. Shelley lingered, deleting emails, then scurried off. Miss Lorraine handed Luke a brownie and grinned. "You just fired the first shot, Sheriff." Rain fell that night, the first in weeks, cooling the dry earth. Luke stood in it, feeling the shift. The town had found its nerve. But the fight wasn't over. Outside the courthouse days later, Luke stood tall, badge gleaming. Clara handed him the audit. Fake companies, siphoned funds, lies on paper. Vance's safety services were a sham. Shelley's outreach was a blog mocking people's fences. Ronnie had billed for non-existent cameras. Every cent traced, every scam exposed. They started with Vance, caught buying tactical rope at the hardware store. He ranted about rights as Clara cuffed him. Shelley tried wiping her laptop but folded when Luke listed her charges. She sobbed about jail's bad lighting. Ronnie turned himself in with a box of donuts, admitting he just liked the security title. Then there was Margaret. Her house was empty, her SUV gone. Luke knew she wouldn't run. She was too stubborn. Sure enough, word came that Margaret had barricaded her garage, now a sovereign CIVYC zone, with chairs and potted plants blocking the door. A sign declared her saw Grand Overseer Saul. She stood in her driveway, megaphone blaring, in a sash reading Saul founder Saul. "This is tyranny!" she screamed as Luke approached, warrant in hand. He read the charges: fraud, illegal surveillance, tampering. "You can't arrest a president!" she spat. "You're not a president," Luke said. "You're a lady yelling in a garage." He stepped over her barricade, dodging a stray fern, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's done!" Her defiance cracked. Neighbors watched, phones out, not for drama but for relief. She'd find their flags, their lights, their lives. Now she was done. Margaret didn't fight as Luke led her to the cruiser. That night, Sagebrush breathed easier. Luke sat on his porch, boots up, a slice of Lorraine's pie in hand. Kids across the street hung early Halloween bats, no flyers in sight. Clara called Margaret was already demanding HOA rights from jail. Luke chuckled. "Before or after she tried to secede?" "Both," Clara said. He walked to his gate, eyeing his saw HOA free saw sign. It had started as a jab. Now it was a promise. Trials would come, but Margaret's reign was over. Sagebrush was free. And somewhere, Daisy was grazing in Cow Valhalla, knowing her death had sparked a reckoning. Luke tipped his hat to the stars and went inside. The law had won.